Who's yelling?
Welcome back to another episode of Kicking It with Coach Red, where we bring you all the news, stories, takes, and opinions about your favorite teams from the Pacific Northwest, from the good to the bad to the Mariners.
The sweet, sweet Mariners, baby.
You can have them.
It is a changing of the guard, if you will. Pete Carroll is no longer the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and we are going to dive into that with full force, talking about Pete and the legacy that he leaves behind, uh, where we think this Seahawks front office can go, and some intriguing names to look out for in this coaching carousel cycle. But before we do that, why don't I tell you a little bit about us? If you're looking for a guy that is just upbeat, positive, just going for it, hardcore, ready to roll, like Pete Carroll himself, and maybe even shares a birthday with him. Maybe you're looking for a guy like me, your boy Coach Red. You can find me on Twitter at the Real Coach Red, on Instagram at the Real _ Coach Red, TikTok at the Real Coach Red. Also find us over on YouTube. Search Kicking It with Coach Red. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, leave a comment or two. If you're looking for a guy that's a little bit more old school, might give you a different perspective on the league, kind of like a Chuck Knox type. Maybe you're looking for a guy like Scott, aka Scott the Thought, aka Scottage Cheese.
I'm happy to be here.
And if you're looking for a guy that is always kind of with Pete Carroll, he's just always around and he just keeps popping up and popping up, kind of like Ken Norton Jr. If you're
That's
looking
fair.
for a guy like that, you're looking for a guy like Cain.
Yeah, I'm Cain. You can find me over on Twitter, Cain2406, on YouTube at Cain06, TikTok, and Cain0624. Also, follow the show's socials over on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Red Pod. Follow us. Do it, freaking do it.
The news is a little shocking today. Pete Carroll comes out after the season and says that he has all the intentions on coaching. You get past Black Monday, and you're into Wednesday, and you feel like you're going to get ready. There's some other decisions that are going to be looming heavy for the Seahawks team. And then news breaks that Pete Carroll is out as head coach, but is going to continue with the team in an advisory role. Press conference today with Pete Carroll goes about a half hour, and he doesn't really talk about the firing or change of position, if you will, that it was a point where the organization wanted to get a new leader in house, but the support he had for John Snyder was huge, and the advisory role he's going into is assisting John Snyder. And he also said that he is not going to have a say in the next coaching hire. But with this, I think it really shows you the type of person that Pete Carroll is from this press conference. And some of the things he said just really struck a chord why this guy is such a great leader of men and molding some of these young men into full-fledged men. And one thing that really stuck with me throughout this press conference is he talked about identifying a trait in a person that makes them unique and letting that shine, letting the players be who they are, finding out what's important about you, find your unrelenting qualities, things that you won't compromise on, and you just go to the table. And you don't let it change. And some of that was great in the Pete years, and some of it was extremely frustrating as well. And we're going to get into that. But that press conference, a ton of emotion. He's got some current players in the room, and Geno Smith and Bobby Wagner and Tyler Lockett. And it got a lot of people emotional because he's the greatest statistical coach in Seattle Seahawks history. He's going to go down as one of the best coaches in NFL history. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. And there's going to be a lot that he did that helped transform the league in multiple ways, way that you let the players be themselves, the way that he said, this is my defense. My players are better than yours. Go ahead and beat it. So
right. And to cap off on that, Pete did it at 2 levels. Like, that's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in coaching history, right? To create a program at USC and
And
kind
win, be
of
the number one team.
right, and have that mentality instilled into his team year in and year out, and to take that. And I listened, I believe, to Chris Long earlier today said, or it was no, it was Mike Robb. It was Mike Robb. That's right. He said that when Pete came up early in, I believe, the 90s when he was the Jets coach, he was ahead of the game, and players at that time couldn't adapt to how his coaching style was and how his game plan was.
And then they responded with Belichick later.
Right. And then you get Pete, goes away for a bit, comes out with the USC stuff, wins the national championship, and absolutely dominated the scene. Then becomes the Seahawks head coach and just instilled, like we talked about with Harbaugh and how he restored Michigan, right? That is what Pete Carroll did, because we had the Mike Holmgren years. Those were lots up and down, but it was mostly great, right? And then you come to the Pete Carroll years, and 10 out of 14 seasons, he's had a winning percentage.
And he goes out on a winning percentage too.
Exactly.
Even though this was a disappointing year.
Well, he only had 2 years that were losing seasons, and both of those were 7 and 9 clips.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
So that is remarkable. I guess the one thing that I question about Pete, and I love Pete, and I think that, the city should name lots of streets after him and put statues everywhere. He's a first round Hall of Famer, and if he isn't, it would be just a travesty. But one of the things is eventually coaches are figured out, and it's harder to adapt year after year. If you think of like Vince Lombardi down, Green Bay, he couldn't coach now. Bear Bryant couldn't coach now. Don Shula couldn't coach now. So when he came in with that Legion of Boom and his vision for the defense and building that up, everybody's like, well, what is he doing? Until it all came together.
Right. And how many teams follow suit now?
Exactly. But there comes a point in time when your era has passed, and it may not have, maybe he had more juice, but at least he goes out with a winning season. He goes out with his dignity, which he deserves, and respect. He's not getting run out of town. He's not being vilified. He did a lot for this city. And I think about other coaches in Seattle. Yeah. Who's compared to him? Lenny Wilkes back in the Sonics back in the 70s?
Lou Piniella, those are really your only guys that are sitting there with him. And I guess you throw Holmgren in the mix too.
Don James?
Yeah.
I mean, those are all great legendary coaches, but I think Pete Carroll eclipses all of them. And his positivity and his energy and his just getting in there, shooting hoops, tearing his shirt off when, DK came in for an interview.
That's so good.
Yeah, just an amazing guy. So I have mixed feelings today. So
I do too.
When I have good feelings, I put up my little Buddha statue here like this. Can you see it?
That's
but
great.
When I have bad days, I turn it around. See it here?
Nice.
So I don't know if it's this or this.
And I think what you're touching on is the end of that era. And it's tougher because his message resonated early. And the longer you're around guys, he's 5 decades older than a lot of the players that he is coaching. And you look at this, and in today's NFL, the game has changed in the voice of players, from NIL deals in college football to people forcing themselves out, kind of like Russell Wilson did, and people forcing the hands of management. And Pete is a guy that just wanted to win football games. And he said, they asked him, do you have any regrets? He goes, yeah, the losses. And he goes, the thing about a great coach is you can never win enough. When I had my 17, 18, 19 game win streak at USC, it was like, well, that's great, but now I want the next one. And now I want the next one. It's kind of
Like
like
Nick
an addict
Saban.
searching for that high. And it's him continuously going and striving for greatness and not resting on his laurels and trying to compete. But you saw with, as this tenure has gone along, that even this year, he said it. He goes, after when they were in the midst of that 4-game losing streak, they're like, is your message still resonating with the players? And it was the first time that I've ever seen Pete Carroll come back with a response that I was a little bit unexpected, where he said, I don't know, you're going to have to ask them. That's not a
Mhm.
Pete Carroll response. And I think that ownership saw it a little bit, but I think that this is a guy that is key to have around this program. And I think that with whoever they bring in as his replacement can learn a ton. The guy is an optimist through and through, and a guy that just wants to grind. And he said it. He goes, I still have the juice. Like I'm ready to get going in whatever my new role's going to be. And I'm sure as heck excited that he's going to be sticking around this team, because he said this, I'm just a coach. Coaches come and go, but this is for the organization. I want to leave them in a better spot than it was when I got it. And I want it to be in a place where it can continue to press forward. And I think that he did an amazing job at pushing this to new limits, winning the Super Bowl, bringing in guys that are going to go down as legends for Seahawks for eternity. And
Right.
during the Pete Carroll era, I would say you have more of those than any other era that you had in Seahawks history.
I agree. I agree. And I'm gonna come out and say it honestly. The show knows, everybody I talk to knows, I've been calling for Pete Carroll's head for some time, right? Doesn't mean I dislike the guy, right? He's done nothing but great things as the Seahawks head coach. I love him for that, right? But I've also thought that they needed a new voice for quite a minute. And I think it really showed this year, because this team, as I've said time and time and time again, that they're too good to be this bad.
Mhm.
They really are. There is so much talent on that roster, and they're 9-8 on
Yeah,
a year.
the
They get swept
defense.
by 2 divisional rivals. It's not good. It almost, split with the other.
Yeah. It's a, yeah, I don't know. It was disappointing. For Sean McVay as a young coach, he has Pete's number. He
Oh,
got it.
yeah.
I mean, uh, as loaded as the Seahawks are, and especially on defense, to be ranked as low as they are, and how much draft capital we've invested and free agents we've signed, to have, these second-rate running backs run for 150 yards and look like Pro Bowlers. There's some real problems there, and there's some schematic things. And I don't lay that all on Pete. Assistant coaches have a, something to do with that. And I'm sure the assistant coaches will be gone. I was talking to Coach Fred earlier today, and he's like, "Yeah, when a new coach comes in, he purges all the rest of the coaching staff and lets them go."
I don't see Clint Hurst or Shane
No,
returning.
no, not at all. I mean, with all the talent they had at their fingertips, and to allow those many yards and those many points, and to not be able to respond to, say, San Francisco and the Rams, to not know how to at least put up a real competitive game, that was tough to watch. But what I'll say about Pete is, any restaurant in town that sends him the bill after the meal should be firebombed. He
I agree.
deserves the utmost respect. And this is not a town that's used to winning.
No.
You guys love the Mariners. God
Sure
bless
do.
you. To me, it's painful to
is.
not even
For
get to
us,
the
it's
playoffs
painful as
for
well.
one game. They couldn't win one extra game. And it's that type of disappointment to have the Sonics ripped out from us when we were good fans. We were loyal fans. I remember going to the parades when they were the world champions, the Sonics, back in 1979. So you guys weren't even a glimmer in your father's eye, but I remember that as a kid.
No.
And you know, he was amazing. And I think the Seahawks head coaching position will be a coveted position. I think a lot of people will want it because it's not a rebuild, it's a change of direction. You have a town that just loves the Seahawks, that's supportive. You have a smart fan base that when they're at the game, they know when to get loud and when to be quiet and when to boo bad calls. Anybody that comes in here has got the play set for them.
Yeah, I think this is the most attractive opening that's out there in the NFL right now. It's the best roster construction. And like you said, you've got some options with Geno Smith, with him not hitting some of those escalators that would have kicked into the next round of his contract, make it a more appealing type of guy to come in, and him finishing with the 11th best quarterback rating. It puts them in a good spot. And agreed, I don't want to paint Pete as a saint year in and year out, because I don't think he was. There were so many times I was beating my head against the wall saying, stop running the football. Like I've said it on this podcast multiple times. The Cowboys playoff game, 3 quarters of doing nothing in the run game and then saying, all right, Russ, chuck it around. Let's see if we can win this thing. You know, I get that that's his philosophy and having that strong run game. And you can see that some of that changed over his tenure. But like you said, Scott, you sit there and look at it, made the Seahawks get comfortable with winning. If the Seahawks had a 7-9 year, it was looked at terribly by the fan base.
And that would have been amazing.
It's a great place to be. It's a great place to be.
Yeah. So anyways, well,
nothing but love for the man. Like utmost respect. You did bring us home a championship.
Oh wow!
And you know, back to back, and the worst thing about it, right, is losing the second championship is the dynasty was kind of destroyed before it began, and it just never kind of returned. And after the Super Bowls, it was just kind of regressed. So, but nothing but respect for Pete, dude. He just he should be inducted into the Seahawks Hall of Fame.
Oh, no, the NFL on the Hall of Fame. It's
going to happen quickly.
And you know what? He also caught lightning in the bottle with the drafts when he won the Super Bowl. I mean, Richard Sherman, where was he drafted?
Fifth round.
Cam Chancellor, where was he drafted?
Fifth round.
Know, Bobby Wagner, 2nd round. He would have, looking back, he would have been the #1 pick in the NFL that year.
Pretty close.
Yeah. There was some luck, but there was also a lot of strategery with and back then the way they evaluated the draft and what they got, where they got it, it was remarkable. And it paid off in a big way, and it changed the NFL in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to see a 100% just all on himself John Schneider draft coming in 2024.
Well, they've had some stinkers too.
Yeah, Pete talked about it too, that he said, I'm not going to really go in and tell the next guy coming in how to do his job. But he said having a great relationship and having a marriage with your GM is important, you know, being able to push. And he goes, me and John competed against each other. He said one key was the Marshawn Lynch trade. He just kept going to John Steyer, said, we need to go get Marshawn. He goes, we called him every week. If we would have handled it as business as usual, like most teams, Marshawn Lynch would have never been a Seahawk. But Pete Carroll kept pushing John. John kept making the calls, and eventually it worked out. But that really brings into light where we're going to go next. Are they going to go with familiarity, or are they going to go with a completely new slate? And that's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds when you start seeing the names come to fruition on who they've requested interviews with, and really what they attempt to do in this coaching search.
Yeah.
One
other thing I'll say about the draft, and I'll let it go, but the other amazing draft pick that they did is when they traded up for Tyler Lockett. They saw what he could be. That was an amazing draft pick.
All-time great Seahawks.
Yep.
Just forever enshrined.
Yep.
And I didn't feel great about it because they had traded up like the year before for another Kansas State wide receiver who didn't make the team out of camp. And I'm like, oh God, are we doing it again? And then just a nails pick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
go on, coach. What's the next section?
We're going to go into potential hires, some guys that we've highlighted that we think should and could be on the radar, and kind of why we like them or dislike them in this rumor cycle that will be continue to turn. And the first guy I want to talk about is the first guy that's been named by ESPN. We were talking about it before it was announced through ESPN, and the obvious link here is Dan Quinn, former Seahawks defensive line coach and defensive coordinator, goes to Atlanta, is the head coach there, takes them to a Super Bowl, has the biggest meltdown in Super Bowl history, almost gets canned one year, and his players rally around and get enough wins to save his job for that year. Doesn't happen the following year. Ends up going to Dallas and putting together a pretty star-studded and effective defense. And for me, we're going to hammer a lot on some defensive coaches early because that's the way that I think that they should go, because I think that finding good defensive coaches is tougher and tougher to do in today's NFL. But with Dan Quinn, he's a guy that's been in the cycle. He's been interviewed for multiple head jobs on the second turnaround for him. And he's going to be one of the hottest names out there, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And he came back to the Cowboys, and they're having a special season. They're up there in all the rankings. What are your guys' takes on Dan Quinn coming back to Seattle?
Scott, I'll let you take this one first.
Well, I'll give him a Buddha. I like Dan Quinn. You know, he's an accomplished coach. He understands the ownership. He understands the Seahawks and the system. He was a part of putting together the Super Bowl seasons. He's had good success and some challenges outside the Seahawks. I think he could come back and be good. But what I think the basic question for me is, Dan Quinn is my age. He's 54 years old. He's been in the league a while and a long time. He could come in and be really effective, or people might be able to kind of guess what he's up to and scheme for him. So do we go? I mean, everybody says Dan Quinn's the guy, and he might be, and it might be a good thing. But then I also look at some of these younger coaches that come out of nowhere. Sean McVay for the Rams. I mean, they were supposed to be a 2-15 team this season. They were just written off. Now they're in the playoffs after losing all that star power and everything. And then in the Dolphins, what's the guy's name?
Mike McDaniels.
Okay, the reason I can't remember his name is I don't know if you guys watched Looney Tunes as kids.
I did.
You remember Foghorn Leghorn?
I do.
The kinda. Yeah.
Rooster.
Yeah, and he was trying to woo this widow hen who had this little chick with big glasses named Egbert, and he would come up with all these plans, destroying everything that Foghorn Leghorn thought he could think about. Well, you know, Egbert's been a great coach. You have to give him a lot of credit, and he's going to learn. So do we want an Egbert or do we want a Dan Quinn? Again, I would not be upset if Dan Quinn is our next head coach. I believe in him, and I think if he came back here, it would mean he believes in the system. But do we want to do something unconventional and quirky and have some success with a younger coach with kind of a whole different take on the NFL that's creative, that's wild, that takes big risks? I don't know.
Well, as you said, you know, Dan Quinn was a big part of the Super Bowl runs. And you can see a significant drop-off after he left for Atlanta. The years after, yes, the defense was still great, but were they executing like they were prior? No. And I love Dan Quinn just as much as the next guy, right? Stellar defense, kind of everywhere he's been. Let's not forget Marcus Trufant's little brother, Desmond Trufant, was an absolute stud under Dan Quinn. And
Well,
now
the Falcons had a top-rated defense when he was there, especially
right.
1 or 2 years after. That
Not
really
in the
helped
second half of that
catalyze.
one. Not in the second half of that one Super Bowl.
Yeah, we're not going to
Right.
talk about that half. Let's just
Yeah.
talk about things we want to do, pick and choose, right?
And then now in Dallas, where he's just had a star-studded cast of characters, right? The dude has known success on the defensive side everywhere he's been.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, as you also touched on, he is an older gentleman. And to that thing, like you were talking about Sean McVay, he's also part of the Mike Shanahan tree.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's not a bad thing to do. Go and looking at one of the legendary coaches in the league. I mean, yeah, Mike Shanahan, and then isn't there, and then Bill Belichick, right? So you have those guys in their trees.
I think you should chop down the Bill Belichick tree and use it for cordwood.
Well, technically, there's only one good coach out of his entire tree, and that's Mike Vrabel, and we'll get to him. But otherwise, I do love Dan Quinn. Personally, I don't think he should be our next head coach. I think they need to go in a different direction. You are on the defensive train. I'm on the offensive train. This offense is the best offense that I think the Seahawks have ever had.
The best offensive line, for sure.
Right. And
because
not
Russell
to mention the
gobbled up all the money.
Receivers.
Yeah. Well, Russell gobbled up all the money. So you couldn't get a good offensive line.
Right.
And when he was young and athletic, he could deal with it. But then later on, that formula fell apart.
And, thank you, Broncos, for giving us Charles Cross.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for all your gifts.
Gift that keeps on giving. The one last thing I'll conclude on with Dan Quinn is he has been successful on the defensive side at damn near every stop that he's had. And he has ties to this team and to the legends that were part of that Legion of Boom. And he can continue to bring them in-house and be around these young guys learning the game. So I think that's a positive that you can see as well. He's going to be a name that's linked until he takes a job somewhere else, removes himself from the running completely, or is hired by the Seahawks. And you touched on that Belichick tree. The next guy we're going to talk about is Mike Vrabel. Just recently let go by the Titans. He was with them for 6 years. Came over before that. He was the defensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. So he went to the playoffs 3 times in his 6-year tenure. He had a winning season in his first 4, and the last 2 were both losing seasons. He was the NFL Coach of the Year in 2021. What I see with him is a guy that is well regarded as a motivator of men in the NFL. And I think that a lot of his troubles that he came down with in these last couple of years with the Titans was injury at quarterback. Brian Tannehill was playing at such a high level and got injured and got the reins handed to Malik Willis. Josh Dobbs was thrown in there as well. And this year, again, the up and down with Will Levis versus Tannehill. And I think the other thing is the organization hamstringing him with their second biggest offensive playmaker, shipping out A.J. Brown instead of paying the man. And Derrick Henry only has so many carries in him per game. And if you're loading the box, it makes it difficult to compete. And his defense was not at the highest level. And that roster continued to get a little bit older. But I think that how he motivates and being the guy under Bill Belichick, obviously, if that job comes open, he is the lock-on favorite choice for that job. Yes. But I think that with Mike Vrabel, you get a guy who has experience in the league, who has had success, who's made it to 1 game short of a Super Bowl, and is a guy that I think is well regarded around the league and is now one of the hottest names that's out there.
I agree with you on that. And the big thing is Mike Vrabel, yes, he is from the Belichick system, so he's all about that Patriot way. But he does it in his own way. And you saw those years where he didn't have an injury, right? That offense, yes, it carried on Derrick Henry's back. Who was their top receivers those years?
A.J. Brown.
Right. Other than that, nobody. And
No, you had Johnny Smith.
Johnny Smith was all right. They had also Delaney Walker, but
True.
Derrick Henry was the workload. As you said, he's a motivator. He kind of brings what Pete did, in a sense, right? He gets close to his players. He always shows the love. He is a man who loves to just have their team be a unit, practically. Out of all of the head coaches, that one shocked me that they let him go. Just like Pete, it absolutely shook me to my core because he's done nothing but great things there. And now I think it just makes too much sense.
Well,
Right?
wait a minute, but you got a Belichick kind of coaching tree, and Belichick, great coach, first round Hall of Famer,
Yep.
whatever. But his style versus Pete's style is polar opposites.
And the thing with
Eh,
Mike
eh,
Vrabel is he has fun with it. You can
well,
see it. He doesn't exactly act. And this is a head coach that's done it as a player. He was a Patriot legend on the field.
sure.
And he's won rings as a player. And as Coach Red said, he was one game shy as, a head coach. I just think that with the personalities of this team, Mike Vrabel can kind of keep a lid on it and make them all focused on one goal, and that is winning a Super Bowl. I think that Mike Vrabel will bring a structure that brings this team just even more together. And
Okay, but
he's my pick.
well, not mine. One thing though about Belichick, for example, he had all those great years, but there was a particular quarterback on his
That's
team.
true. The best quarterback to ever live.
Right. I mean, better than Joe Montana,
Yes.
better than Steve Young, better than Dan Marino, better than all of them. And it's, you don't get that quarterback in the 6th round.
Oh, not anymore.
I mean, it was such a fluky marriage. And then when Brady left the Patriots, he won another Super Bowl, and Belichick swirled around the toilet and went into the sewer.
That's true. That's true.
So I'm not, I respect Belichick, and I think he's a great coach, but I sometimes think he gets a lot of credit for things that
Again, like you touched on Pete earlier, where at some point you game plan for it. You know it. You've seen it for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And I think Belichick has been past his time. But Mike Vrabel has just been such a staple for that Tennessee Titans team. And
Well,
how
he was
well
good back.
he
He was
turned
in
it
the
around.
heyday of the Houston Texans when they were winning, division title after division title.
Yes.
And the one thing that I will say to conclude the Vrabel talk here is you get the same type of leader, but with a different voice in Mike Vrabel. I think that he would mesh very well with John Schneider, with Pete Carroll still being in the building. I think those two would just have a blast doing like a motivation off for each other, just sitting there, just hyping the other one up.
Yeah.
Pete's still got that juice, and I think that Vrabel still has that juice and wants to prove to Tennessee that they made a big old mistake.
Yeah. 100%.
well, I hope you guys are
agree with
right.
that.
I hope you guys are right. I want to be wrong on this one.
Scott, I know you wanted to push this into the youth category. Well, here we go. The next guy we're going to bring up is a 36-year-old defensive coordinator for the Ravens. That's Mike Macdonald. This guy was underneath John Harbaugh, originally gets his first crack in the NFL with them, works his way up to linebackers coach, goes to John's brother Jim at Michigan for 1 year as the defensive coordinator. And then the Ravens let go of Wink Martindale, and Mike Macdonald's come in and really done some things with this defense that kind of had a down year in the last year of Wink. And they're one of the top defenses in the league. This is a smart guy. We talked about getting a different voice in here. Now you're getting a guy that's under the Harbaugh tree. And the one thing that I will say, I like him a little bit more under John, and he didn't spend as much time with Jim because we'll get to Jim later. I'll save it for there. But this is a young emerging coach that he might be a little too young to get that first look, but I think that he is a very intriguing name because with the athletes and multiplicity that they have on different levels of that Ravens defense, I think he can inject that into the Seahawks defense to get a quick turnaround. And part of the reason, Kane, why I say I want a defensive coach, because you have all the talent on defense.
Yeah.
I think this offense is easy, where if they can even continue with the output that they've gotten and maybe just get a hair more, I think that the defense is going to keep them in the games, and getting that mindset right is the key to unlocking the success again, a la Pete Carroll.
I like it. I do.
Okay.
I mean, I'm Jim Harbaugh, John Harbaugh, legendary coaches, played each other in the Super Bowl. They're proven. We'll get into Jim a little later. John, amazing coach. And he gets overlooked a lot of times, but
They weren't even talking about him as the longest tenured head coach. They were talking about Mike Tomlin, Bill Belichick, and they threw in Andy Reid and some other guys. Like, they're forgetting about Harbaugh, because Harbaugh has had a lot of success with the Ravens for over a decade.
And how many losing seasons has he had?
I believe it was 1 or 2, and that was injury riddled years, but with Lamar.
Yeah. So any young coach that peels off from his tree, that is something very intriguing. Might be a little riskier, Dan Quinn, for example. We know who he is. He knows who we are, or who the Seahawks are. He understands the culture. But damn, I mean, to have a young guy like that could come in and maybe coach for 15 years.
You'll love to see it. Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, that would be pretty exciting if he's the guy. It's kind of like playing blackjack. Do you hit at 16 or do you not?
Right. And with this, like, you can see how the last couple of years in Baltimore has been known for their defense. The majority of the last 20 years, honestly, because you had Ray Lewis. And then
Tony Siragusa.
He was fun.
What was the safety?
Ed Reed.
Ed Reed.
Oh, man.
Sizzle, Terrell Suggs.
All of those years that they had stellar defenses. That's what you know of the Baltimore Ravens.
Right.
Well, you look at the guys that he's helped mold. Kyle Hamilton at the safety spot.
Yes.
Justin Matabuke.
I mean, they had Marcus Peters,
mid-round guy that is excelling beyond his years on the defensive line. Patrick Queen. You've got Marlon Humphreys on the secondary. You've got guys that are drafted by Harbaugh and really put together in an expert fashion by Mike McDonald.
And you think Schneider could work with him in the draft?
See.
But like we said, their defense the last couple of years has been down. And yes, injuries can't really predict when they're going to happen. You can't stop them from happening. And so that's why they had the down years. But this defense this year is revitalized, right? You go out, you get Roquan Smith, add him with Patrick Queen, and those are the best. I think that's the best linebacking duo you've seen. Those two are absolute studs.
What I also like to see is when they faced stiffer competition, especially as the year has gone along, his play calling has gotten stronger and the defense is in that calling card. What they did to the Dolphins and what they did to the 49ers in back-to-back weeks is the epitome. That's if I'm him with a resume, I'm handing in game film of those two and saying, watch this and let's talk.
Yeah.
Right. He's the ultimate game manager because he adjusts how he does stuff throughout the game. And that's something you haven't seen with the Seahawks the last couple of years. The big thing is they run one thing, right? Hey, we're running the ball 3 times in a row. If we punt, we punt. That's just how it is.
We're base cover 3.
Right. Or you're sticking in cover 2 all game.
No, they do not run cover 2.
I know, but it's just an example. Right?
I might have to put you on mute if you bring up cover 2 in the Seahawks.
I'm bringing up example. Heck yourself, all right? So we need somebody at this head coaching job that's going to adjust throughout the game. You see coaches do it so many times throughout the league now. And that's why I think this year has been so wacky on a lot of the stuff, is people just adjust mid-game, adjust in the third, adjust in the fourth. But and that's just something you haven't seen with the Seahawks
No.
in the last I would want to say 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I would agree.
If we're gonna bring in the next guy we're gonna talk about is another defensive guy. And this is a guy that if you're talking about running something different from the rest of the league, this is one of the most blitz heavy defensive coordinators out there. It's Brian Flores, was head coach with the Miami Dolphins for a couple of years, gets let go, goes to the Steelers last year when the Steelers have a lockdown defense with a subpar play from Kenny Pickett. Then he becomes a defensive coordinator again with the Vikings this year. And early on in this season, when they were healthier, I want you guys to name me a couple of top defensive backs for the Vikings, because the only ones you really know are Patrick Peterson, and Byron Murphy. And Patrick Peterson ends up having to play safety for him later in the year. Injuries riddled this, but at the beginning of the year with their blitz heavy scheme, Brian Flores was able to get this team as one of the top defenses in the league. They started the 49ers 3-game losing streak. And the other thing that you look at is when you lost Kirk Cousins, you had to play a little bit from behind, so you had to get a little bit more one-dimensional. He blitzed the most and got the most pressure home from blitzes. And because of that simulated blitz, when they were rushing only 3, they got home more often than anyone else in the NFL. So this is a guy that does have some head coaching experience. He was very abrasive at his time when he was with the Dolphins. They've said that he's softened that a little bit, but
He got shafted by the Dolphins, though.
He sure did. He sure did.
He got shafted. I mean, he was bringing home the bacon and making it a better team, and he was treated really disrespectfully.
And this is a guy that's also under the Belichick
tree.
Yeah.
Yes, he is.
But he does it way different. The amount that this guy blitzes, and if you look at the players that are on this team right now, going into next year, I don't know if Jamal Adams is still on this team, but Jamal Adams, heavy blitz guy. If you're looking at the likes of Derek Hall, I think his body type leans a little bit more into that blitzing, running guys off the edge like Spoon and getting after the quarterback, getting creative. I think that's why I like this fit a little bit, because it gives you the ability to create pressure. And I think that with the secondary that they have on this team, they can hold up a little bit better, especially when you get the quarterback off platform, where you can eliminate a little bit. Is coverage more important or pressure? Well, we're going to figure out if pressure helps coverage if he becomes the head coach of this team.
Yeah.
Right. And as we said, he started out as a linebackers coach.
Ooh, Buddha.
And
I like it.
He was the linebackers coach for Bill Belichick, and those were the years that they had such a stacked linebacking core. And
Mike Vrabel.
They actually did have Mayo at that point, but that was in his prime. But then he goes to Miami and starts really working with that defense, and you saw the jump from years prior, and that defense really took off. And as you said, he went to the Steelers, where he had probably the best defensive player we're going to see. He's up there with TJ Watt and their secondary, Mika Fitzpatrick. They did have Artie Burns last year.
Well, and he was just in an advisory role there. But I think what you look at Flores is his tenure was cut short in Miami because of him acting like Bill Belichick. This is my way or the highway, and saying that to your guys. He wasn't collaborating as well. And I think that's him getting humbled a little bit, going and taking a lesser role. He also has, I believe he still has an active lawsuit against the NFL about his firing. So he's a guy that went and got humbled a little bit with the Steelers, taking an advisory role, getting a chance to be that DC again. And with a Vikings team that was a lot older on defense and had limited star power throughout that team, I think the pieces are a little bit brighter and shinier over here on the Seahawks. And I'd love to see what he could do with those new toys.
More than Dan Quinn?
We'll see. It's different styles. That's the fun thing about this exercise. We haven't had to do it for 15 years, being able to look, see who's the best fit, who's this and who's what. And that's why we're going to go to a guy who I think is moving up boards as well in the coaching hiring rankings, and that's the Lions defensive coordinator,
Yeah.
Aaron Glenn. He's a Dan Campbell disciple, and I want the juice that Dan Campbell brings. He's a former player. It was voted as the most, like, he was voted as the top defensive coordinator that you wanted to play with, as voted on by the players. So if you're looking for a guy that's in the mold of Pete Carroll as a player-friendly coach, this guy seems like he fits that whole bill. And we talked a lot about how some of these teams have evolved when they get new faces and new teams and new coordinators in there. You know, they go in his first year, it's not great as the defensive coordinator. They get Aiden Hutchinson, they get a few more pieces, and you start to see it come together. And realistically, for this team, he's done a phenomenal job. And you can see, especially look at the first game this year against Patrick Mahomes coming off a Super Bowl win. And they gave him fits all game. And against good competition is when that defense steps up and makes that a closer game and puts it on the offense to win the game. And I think that Aaron Glenn has done a lot to be that driving force. And that whole staff is just an awesome staff that was assembled by Dan Campbell.
And you got to
Right.
love the Hard Knocks, the Lions Hard Knocks. That was a great series.
So good.
Yeah, that was fun to watch. Yeah, and then because he was on Hard Knocks, and this is just as fans, not as coaches and whatever. But it was fun to watch the energy that they had in that season and how they didn't give up. I mean, they could have given up. They could have gone to despair, but they believed. And look at them this year. And next week, them playing the Rams, that's going to be a good game.
Right. And as you touched on, last year their defense wasn't the greatest, but
It was improving, but this
it
year
was
is really a revelation.
And they
Aiden
stepped.
Hutchinson was a huge that
Aiden
dude.
Hutchinson is such a monster.
Yeah, he's
but
awesome.
they also have the likes of Malcolm Rodriguez, Jack Campbell, CJ Gardner Johnson. But he's been hurt all year, so that was their big addition. But then
Kirby Joseph in the secondary, that's a guy that is molded by Aaron Glenn. So it's a guy that might be a year or two away from getting that head job, but I do think the Seahawks should definitely give him a look.
Right. And as you can see, like, their defense has turned around, and that's kind of the momentum that you want in a defensive guy, right? You always want the momentum to be going forward and taking that next step to be even greater.
Yeah. He's got the pieces.
The next guy we're going to talk about is probably going to be the highest profile name on this list. He's the
most controversial.
Definitely the most controversial, and that's going to be Jim Harbaugh. He's a guy that's just coming off a national title win. He has familiarity with the division after being a head coach for the 49ers. He's taken a team to a Super Bowl. And the one thing why I talked about Mike Macdonald, why I liked him and that he didn't spend a lot of time with Jim, is for me, in the end of his tenure with the 49ers, he's a tough-nosed coach, and I think that he's suited super well for the college game because he's a guy that is no thrills. You go out there, you put in work. Day 50 looks the same as day one from him from a practice standpoint. When you're working with 18 to 22-year-old kids, that message resonates. You're going for greatness. You're going to be remembered there. But when you're sitting there with a 35-year-old veteran who's got two bad knees trying to do that, the message gets a little bit taxing on those players. Would he be a fit? Yes. But I think the other thing is John Schneider is going to be integral in making the play calls on the personnel. And I think that with Jim Harbaugh coming off the success he had with the 49ers, revitalizing Michigan football, I think that he's going to want to say in personnel, like a heavy say and final say. And I don't know if he can get that with the Seattle Seahawks.
Right. And I don't know if I said that here on the episode or before we recorded. One of my coworkers did say, you just got out of a marriage, right? With Pete Carroll, where he was just the top dog. What he said goes. And do you want to do that again, or do you want to flirt around for a little bit? And
I don't. I think we talked about this pre-episode, but Pete Carroll and John Schneider. Pete Carroll would identify guys he wanted, and it wasn't going to happen if John Schneider didn't also sign off on it. Those two worked in
right.
tandem so well, and Pete said that in his press conference. It was a marriage. It wasn't it's my way or the highway. This was a true team effort for them, and I think
Yeah.
that Harbaugh's going to want a little bit more of that team.
Right.
He's gonna want the marriage that was happening in 1950s America.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, but
But
you can't go back to, you know what? It's also about our town here, you know, Seattle
We
and the
hate
greater
him
Seattle.
even more now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because is his attitude as a coach going to mesh with the fans?
not
And
at
that
all.
is he going to mesh with Schneider?
Well, the fans thing, he wouldn't be accepted from day one, right? He was the 49ers coach in our most heated rivalry.
And we smoked him. But
Exactly.
but you know, we can say, oh, the fans, well, they don't really know or whatnot, but they're the ones that buy tickets.
Yeah.
They're the ones that buy jerseys. You know, they're the ones that buy $20 koozies that cost 25 cents to make. And I've been in this town my whole life for the most part, and I just don't think his attitude would mesh. I don't think the fans would like him. And I think we will jump down his throat if he doesn't win instantly. And I don't know,
That's
it's
the highest leverage situation for sure. If you're bringing in a guy, I think that it would be on a hairpin trigger. And the one thing, like you're saying there, is yeah, the fans with his personality, but the one thing that cures everything is winning titles. And he's
and
proven that he
selling
can get you
merchandise
there.
and tickets.
Yeah, but I think that with the national title game just happening, him kind of having linked rumors to a handful of teams with intriguing quarterbacks, I think that a little bit more open where they don't have an established GM in place is going to be where he finds a home.
Okay,
Right.
you just said quarterbacks. You talked about it. Geno Smith, I love the guy, and I appreciate the fact that he won 5 games coming from behind the way he did. But he's not a flashy quarterback.
Correct.
He's an above average quarterback, but he's not an elite quarterback. And how would that work?
I mean, let's talk about the next guy that I want to highlight, and that's going to be the hottest offensive name on the board, and that's Ben Johnson,
Right.
the offensive coordinator for the Lions.
Yeah.
The one thing that you see is when Dan Campbell and company got the job, they shipped off Matthew Stafford, insert Jared Goff, who was looked as a throw-in, not the long-term solution. And what he's been able to do to get the most out of Goff has been nothing short of miraculous.
No, it's amazing.
The balance that they have on that offense is crazy. You look at 2 electric runners this year, and David Montgomery, who was cast aside by the Chicago Bears after not being a consistent above average running back. And the guy looks all worldly at the beginning of the year. You insert a different type of back in Jahmyr Gibbs. And then look last year when they had DeAndre Swift, who was oft hurt, but had all the talent in the world. And then you throw in a Jamal Williams, who had 21 tutties last year. He can get multiple with his offense, which is something that really intrigues me, because there are times when the Seahawks offense under Pete Carroll's regime has gotten stagnant. It's run the ball, play action pass, throw it over the top, maybe factor in a little bit more screens in the Shane Waldron area. But I want to see people hit the middle of this field. And when you look at the type of players that they had with the Lions, at the likes of Amon-Ra St. Brown, he feasts in the middle of the field. You want to know who else is going to feast in the middle of the field? JSN.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you. I think that this is the most perfect fit for the Seahawks to do. As I've said time again, this offense has so much talent on it. You have a perfect 1-2 punch in K9 and Sharps. You really do. You have thunder and lightning, and not to mention the 3-headed monster. Yes, Tyler Lockett is aging, but JSN is going to be the better Tyler Lockett
one day.
And I think if you get Ben Johnson in here, This offense is going to be so electric. It's going to be hard for defenses to keep
Don't
up.
forget our tight end core either.
Exactly. You have Will Disley, Colby Parkinson. Noah Fant probably not going to be on the roster next
No,
year.
Parkinson's out, is not under contract next year either. So
No,
the only one he got in the house.
I think Noah
is
Fant probably needs a change of real estate to get his career back on track. He was
I agree with
underutilized.
that too.
He was underutilized in his whole 2 years with us.
And that's the thing. Like you look at
Sam Laporta.
Exactly. There you go. He vitalizes his tight end. And that's something you have not seen from the Seahawks.
Since Jimmy Graham and
they didn't even use Jimmy Graham the way he was supposed to.
Jimmy Graham also had 1 year where he had like 12 touchdown receptions. Granted, they asked him to block, which he should have never done because I believe he got hurt a couple of times while blocking.
He was an oversized wide receiver. He wasn't a tight end. And kind of like DK. DK is a oversized wide receiver. He's not a tight end.
Yes. I just think Ben Johnson is the perfect fit for this team.
And he's a guy that was looked at heavily in the last coaching cycle and removed himself from consideration, knew that he had a little bit more work to do, and he's the top name out there.
Well, what I also loved about him on the Lions, going back to Hard Knocks, the competitiveness between him and the DC.
Him and Aaron Glenn, they wanted to win every day.
Yeah, on the practice, playing practice, they were always jaw-jacking one another, calling each other MFers and everything. It was a lot of fun to watch. I like that competitiveness. And is Pete as an advisor or, in the background, that could help. I'm not opposed to that, even though I think our defense really was what cost us a lot of games this year, more than the offense.
And that's the thing that makes it tough, is if you bring in a guy that's an offensive coordinator type, what type of defensive coach are you going to get to join the squad? Because you did have the likes of, you look at the Bengals when Zach Taylor goes there and they're able to get Gino Ariana on staff. He might have still been on staff, and how well that Bengals defense played during their runs deep in the playoffs the last couple of years with a healthy Joe Burrow. It's going to be interesting to see, because I don't think Clint Hurtt's going to be back on this team no matter what happens. So you're bringing in someone from the outside, and that's what gives me a little bit of pause when looking at some of these offensive guys.
Fair enough.
Clint Hurtt needs to be like a linebackers coach or a DB coach or something like that.
Back to the D line.
Yeah. That was
stuff.
God, I hope we draft some big, huge chunk of meat for the middle of our D line next year.
Chunk of meat.
Montez Sweat, or not Montez Sweat, the dude from Texas.
That's Sweat.
I know, but I said Montez Sweat. I got the names mixed up. Sorry,
Devondre, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Last coach we're going to talk about. This one has not been talked about at all in any circles, and I think is the biggest dark horse of this entire bunch. And it's Kellen Moore, former Boise State quarterback, former backup, played a little bit in the league. As soon as he retired, becomes the quarterback coach for the Cowboys. The following year becomes the offensive coordinator, really helps mold Dak Prescott into getting that big record contract, decides that he wants to go test his ability somewhere else and goes to the Chargers. And then you have Justin Herbert get hurt this year, and the contract dispute with Austin Eckler, I don't think helped them. And then when you look at Keenan Allen, who's been reliable like crazy, but then you lose the likes of a Mike Williams, and Quentin Johnston just wasn't ready in his rookie year. This is a guy that has roots to the area. He grew up in Prosser, Washington. His dad, Tom Moore, is the most notable head coach in Washington interscholastic high school football history in this state. There were points in time when he was there with his brother Kirby where they were up so big at halftime, they would put the subs in, and the backup quarterback would take a knee, and he'd look over to the sideline and wait for the 5 count, and he'd take a knee, and they would punt the entire second half. This is a guy that has
That's humiliating.
It's rooted in this area. He's a guy that has had head coaching interviews in the past. And I think that if you're looking for a guy that might be a little bit not ready for that big stage, having a mentor like Pete Carroll with the technical know-how that Kellen Moore has in his brain and the mastery he can get of an offense and impart that onto people, getting that extra bit, because he seems a little stoic to me when he's there. He doesn't seem to be the most relatable. Getting him in the building with Pete and having Pete serve as a mentor could be a match made in heaven. This is a guy that would love to come back home to the state of Washington. Yep, I knew the middle finger was.
Thank you. Thank you. I can
my
get
dark
behind
horse.
that. I can get behind
He's
that.
a really dark host.
Because, dude, he's not proven enough. Yes, barring injuries to the Chargers have just been this sham for the last 20 years where, lots
I
of
feel
weird
bad for
stuff has
Herbert
happened.
though.
Of course.
He's a very talented quarterback, and just
Of course.
his career could get cut short with all the hits he's taken, and losing that mobility and whatnot. I don't know. I'm not buying that one. I think there's better options there, and I think there's a lot of coaches out there that are going to want this job. Let them fight for it.
It's going to be coveted. Like we said from the top, you've got stability at the top with John Snyder. You have Pete Carroll that's still going to be around the building.
You don't have to rebuild the team either.
Exactly.
You just need to add some extra pieces in the draft, get some more free agents,
Yes.
Jamal Adams has not played much the last couple of years. We're paying him all this money. And I don't blame him for getting injuries. It's a brutal sport. But, him not being on the field has been really painful for the Seahawks, trying to adjust for that. Love has done a great job. He's going to the Pro Bowl.
Right.
But you don't have a huge rebuild. You have to change some pieces. You got to draft well. You got to look at that Nuoso pickup as a free agent. Who would have thought that coming to the Seahawks? Right. I don't pay attention to the Chargers defense.
Their backup for when Joey Bosa was hurt.
Yeah. And he's been a stud. It's so sad he got injured. And that, Coach Red, you and I have talked about, is part of what derailed our season, was not having him on the field as the edge rusher.
Good.
But we'll see. I want to see every applicant fight for the job, want the job, not do lip service. Just say, this is my job. I want it. Just like I want Cain's job.
That's probably not gonna happen.
I'm kidding.
I'm cemented.
I'm not interested in the Mariners. Sorry, guys.
That's fair. I just don't think Kellen Moore is the right fit. I really don't. I think he's too young. He's in his early. He's your age. So also my
mid 30s.
Okay.
Or not kids.
He's mid 30s.
I'm Dan Quinn's age.
Coach Red. And, one of my old coworkers sacked him in high school. So take that, Kellen Moore.
I bet you all the wins he had at Boise State and all the records that he did were just really tarnished by the one sack by your friend.
Yeah, exactly.
But
he was delivering beer in Washington.
I just don't think that he's the right fit. I don't think he is as electric as Ben Johnson would be.
And that's agreed. And Ben Johnson's gonna have all of the options in the world, but it is going to be interesting to see how this breaks down, because the Seahawks are a couple of days behind requesting some of these interviews by waiting these extra couple of days. Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting in the coming days and weeks, which of these guys that are out there that are going to be linked to the Seahawks. And I'm going to be sitting by looking at everything. And, we were getting ready to talk about how we're going to move forward with some of the other questions. And this really puts a wrench in it. And I think that it's going to make what direction the Seahawks are going to go in with the free agents, with the personnel that's already on the team, and the draft. It's going to shift by whoever they bring into the building. So this is going to be probably one of the wilder off seasons that we've seen in a while. And I'm excited for it. It's going to be different, but sometimes change is necessary. And it's something that I think we should all look forward to as an opportunity to grow and hopefully get from that 9-win team. Let's get back to 12 and make these deep runs in the playoffs.
Exactly. That's what I want.
But one thing I want to say before we sign off, and I know it's about time, I still want to say thank you, Pete. Thank you for
Yes.
everything you've done for this town. We love you. And you've just been such a great thing for civic pride. And you're an amazing man, and you've accomplished amazing things. And the fact that you're not going to be our coach next year doesn't mean that we don't appreciate everything that you've done.
Agreed.
Pete Carroll's probably the best Seattle coach, him or Don James, but I'd say Pete above Don James at this point. And we just need to have mad props and appreciation and respect. And we're not running him out of town. I mean, he's ending on he's ending on a winning season. Good for you, Pete. And I just hope that as an advisor, you help us, but you want to take a couple days off and not work 20 hours and go do something, we'll do that too.
Yeah.
We love you,
You've
buddy.
earned it. You've
Yep,
earned it.
absolutely.
Yeah, big props to Pete Carroll. And for his sake, I want the Seahawks, and for our sake as fans, to be able to continue to push forward. They asked him in the press conference what his favorite memories were, and one of them was when they won the Super Bowl in New York, finding his wife in the crowd and just spotting her and just feeling proud. And he goes, the other thing is that parade and being able to celebrate. That's what he's going to miss the most, the parade,
Marshawn Lynch
celebrating.
grabbing bottles of Fireball and just drinking it out of the bottle.
Well, know what?
When it's below freezing.
I want them to push forward and get greatness quickly. So Pete Carroll still is with this team and he can enjoy another parade.
That's right.
Great ending line, Coach Red.
You know what else would be great? If we got a little follow on some social media. If you're trying to do that, maybe you might want to find a guy like me, your boy Coach Red, on Twitter at The Real Coach Red, on Instagram at The Real _Coach Red, TikTok at The Real Coach Red. Also find the show over on YouTube. Search Kicking It with Coach Red. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, leave a comment or two. Scott, just say something nice since you don't have any social media.
Yeah, I'm old. I think it's retarded.
All right, Cain, where are you at?
Can't say that.
We're gonna find Scott at the senior center. But Cain, where can we find you at?
You find me on Twitter at Cain2406, on YouTube at Cain06, TikTok and Cain0624. Also follow the show's socials over on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Red Pod. Follow us. Do it, freaking do it.
And as always, stay fresh.
Stay fresh, peeps.
Buddha. All righty.